So again, this is coming off my presentation at the NFCA. It's going to be a little more in depth, but it's specifically going to be geared, this one in particular, more towards coaches, and then also specifically also that niche in terms of coaches in a college setting, because there are some things in what I presented in terms of the ecosystem. There was a reason I wanted the majority of the conversation to be in front of college coaches and older coaches as well, but we'll be able to talk through a lot of specific things in that space and be sure that how we're doing things is important and that the questions that got answered and especially like from the energy flow model perspective, which is something I didn't get to talk about as much, how those things get integrated and how we can create ecosystems that allow us to create performance for our athletes and then also be able to I'm big on, yes, we have to have accountability, but we also have to create spaces for, well, what is the parent responsible for? What is the athlete responsible for? What what am I responsible for in those spaces and those cases as well? Before I get into it, everyone can hear me pretty clearly. Perfect, perfect.
Yes.
So I'm gonna share my screen. The AI companion is on your right-hand side, so you can ask it questions if you join later or if you have to pause for a second on anything I've mentioned. So we'll go ahead and share that. So like the major question we talked about was just specifically style. And in those places, I was able to go through pretty much all of it. But the biggest pieces that I want people to understand, and we from a directive of creating a framework, is again, the two most important pieces are how do I set the table for being able to meet the athlete where they're at physically at that moment? And again, that's going to be any type of test battery that you have, anything you have access to at school, anything in just around you that's relevant in terms of, hey, well, we've got a PT that, shares the space with us and they do an assessment and they help us. It's going to be anything physical like that, any injury history, any type of, if they've got scoliosis, leg length discrepancy, those types of things. And then, where their body awareness is at physically at that moment. And then one of the biggest pieces that I wanted to expand upon was the mental aspect of things, especially when it comes to older athletes and their perspective on coaching. One of the biggest things from as we're getting new kids in, and especially if we're coaching kids at higher levels, we often are not the first person to be there setting a foundation or setting a standard for that athlete. And so we want to be sure that one of the first things we do is create in a collaborative environment and ask them questions about the language that they've been using and also how they interpret that language. One of the things I do in particular is ask a kid like, well, let's watch your video and then I want you to like tell me what's important to you while you're pitching. And recently I've had three newer kids all above the ages of 15 and all three of them had priorities that were more important to them than others. And that kind of gives us the understanding of, okay, where do they think, what do they think is important? And then when I'm thinking about the framework that I'm going to talk about, where are spaces here that make a lot of sense in terms of why they do certain things or why certain things are happening for them. In one of the cases that I had, um, one of the young ladies that was there, her priority was I want to be able to go ahead and I'm thinking about getting my weight onto my front foot and I want to be sure I get my hips through. And so when we talk about things like that, we then look at, okay, well, is the athlete actually doing that in that space? Is that what they think they're achieving? Is it important to them? Obviously, it is important to them because they're talking about it first. Okay, so is that priority going to be something that's relevant? And so when we look at that space in particular, very typical setup. I just want to watch and see, okay, well, you're telling me right there, like all you talked about was I want to be explosive and I want to get my hips through. And so when we look at that space and we watch her move, I'm just thinking about, okay, how does what she tells me coincide with how she pitches? That's all I want to do. And I can see pretty easily, like, okay, that is apparent. Now, getting her hips through, does it happen the way from a performance standpoint that I'd like it to? Doesn't really matter. I would say she swings more. And visually, you can see that there's for some reason there's more of an act of an arc motion and a swing of her hips as opposed to, what we'd see if I was lifting a weight, doing a barbell hip thrust, any of those types of things. But it's important for me to understand how she thinks she's doing things because then it allows me to look at what's happening later on in her motion and see why certain things happen as well. And so all we do is get a preface for, okay, what do you think you're doing? Talk to me. And I would say, especially at with older kids and at the collegiate level, I think we don't place as much a priority on it, but it should be a priority. Well, not necessarily a priority, but a conversation. If an athlete has had 5 years with a particular coach or 8 years, or they've been with the same pitching coach all their life, there are going to be some valuable pieces of information that allow you to continue to develop that athlete at the collegiate level. And if you're someone who does more consultant work, when you receive somebody, that's important as well. Understanding, well, how does this other coach talk? How do they communicate? And then asking the athlete, like, okay, you can say all the wonderful things in the world, like what comes out of their mouth that's important to you? Okay, that kind of starts to give me an understanding of why you do certain things or why certain things aren't accessible to you. And we'll talk about an example of that here today as well. But in essence, that's the first thing we do when we talk about that mental piece in terms of the process of, okay, I want to get to break those initial grounds of knowing the athlete, not just as a person, but also their pitching personality, so to say. So for me, when we look at that, I have force plates. You don't necessarily have to have force plates. It's just information that allows me to see things or validate things I've either always thought or that continue to see work through. Now, when I came to this, the energy flow model, one of the things that I looked at in that space was there are already two kind of quality research papers that were done that took energy flow in terms of force plates. One of them was done with Olympians, and then the other one was done with softball athletes. So when I read these papers, I looked at them and I said, okay, well, we already do a lot of that in performance training, and everything that was all the results within those papers. And anytime I mention a paper, there's a lot of them. If you are wanting to know what those papers are, I can easily send those to you as well, but we'll do that after. So just send me a separate email, write a comment in the Zoom chat when I'm talking about it. Hey, what paper is that you're talking about? But none of these papers, when they measured ground reaction forces or ground contact forces, were any different from the research we already possess from a performance standpoint of how athletes try to accelerate or propel themselves when the task is to be explosive. So we're looking at block starts, running starts, sprint starts, jumps, broad jumps, anything in a horizontal vector. Vector just means the direction that the force is going because it has magnitude and direction. And so you just talk about it in a vector. Nothing too hard to be nothing complicated there. But all these things remain the same. And to me, as someone who came from the performance side, just watching someone move, I was like, well, duh, that why would it be any different? Like, and we have to stop that point as coaches sometimes of thinking that the circle is magic, and as soon as you enter it, everything that's true in the other world, in the real world, changes in terms of physics and math. It doesn't. We've just had a long time to, be able to push certain things that mattered for some, mattered for didn't. But especially when we get seasoned athletes or those we think are already successful or gifted, it's going to be important not just to meet them where they're at, but to understand that at high levels of sport, you are not reinventing the wheel for someone. I didn't work with a Julio Jones or a James Harden or a Paulo Dybala or any of these people and do anything for them, but put them in a space that allowed them to do what they are already gifted to do and to just do it from a more optimal, they don't have to worry about a lot of things. That is all I'm trying to do in this space as well. It is how do we fit the athlete and help them get to a space where, okay, they're a prize stallion. Let's just give them some sugar cubes and make sure they get to the gate, and they've got to do the rest. And so I looked at this and I was like, okay, let's see what the rest of it looks like. And that just became this energy flow model here. So there's 5 really big pieces of energy that are going to happen no matter how any kid pitches. So whether the kid starts when they load, the heel is flat, it's up, their knees are bent, blah blah blah, whatever. All five of all 5 of these things are going to occur. And I've tried to make it as simple as possible. I don't want to add fluff. I'm just talking about weight and pressure. So when we get to this space right here, number one is going to be when pressure drops. So if we go back to the same young lady, there's a moment for every athlete right here when they decide for weight and pressure to accelerate into the ground. I would just call it their load moment, nothing too complicated. Okay. When that happens, you're going to see a spike of ground reaction forces that are measured in force plates. This athlete weighs like 150 pounds. You see that spike come up to 200 plus pounds. And again, it's just about being aware. So if I look at that, the first thing I'm telling the young lady is, okay, when you do that, likely more weight is on your back foot, but then it quickly goes into your front foot. And so now you've got a lot of weight in that number 1 position between both feet. Just information. Now, number 2 is just very simple. We already talk about it a lot. You talk about loading the front foot, drive, whatever, weight transfer, all the fancy words that we think we have now. And that's just shift. Okay, all this weight you got from here, did you move it? Did you move it effectively into your front foot? So if I have an athlete, in her case in particular, that's telling me that's important to her, and she knows or she thinks it's important to her so that she can get her hips through explosively, then I know from a coaching standpoint, right away, 2 may be some of our lowest hanging fruit in terms of where can I easily get buy-in for her, because that's a place she thinks about. And if I help improve that position or it helps change some qualities that she thinks she wants, then likely I'm going to be able to coach it more effectively immediately for her. But again, we just call it shift. And then number 3 is once you're on that single leg and all your weight, the blue line is the back foot, all your weight goes to 0, meaning you're completely on that single leg. How do you push from it? I call that in particular the drive. I don't call it the drive as the entirety of the thing, just because I needed to be able to simplify it in that way. I still reference like your drive. I'll say that. And I say that because the majority of people say that. And again, that goes to the point about meeting the athlete where they're at from the mental aspect. It is annoying. And I would agree for the most part that we shouldn't have to necessarily do it. But because so many people communicated so many different verbiages, and even though they're talking about the same thing, verbs, language, those things dictate a lot of things for perception. If I'm talking about anything, I'm trying to, as much as possible, if that person Googles the word I'm talking about, the action I'm talking about, there's not going to be a lot of opinion about it. There's going to be thousands of results that all say the same thing. And that's something that's forefront for me all the time. But anyways, we go back to that. So there's these 3 pieces. And then, of course, an athlete is going to land. We'll notice very clearly that their landing is the biggest spike of energy in their pitch. So from a training aspect, anything looking forward, I always want to understand in the weight room, if the athlete is not prepared to handle 2 to 4 times their body weight, I would say a majority of what I see in the inability to have a strong front side, or the reason so many kids will turn or change their body, and you're like, well, why did you just do that? Their brain is consciously understanding there's a specific way I can only handle the amount of weight that's about to hit me. I can't do it in the way you're asking, but I can still try and attempt it in a similar way. So that's why we see so many different collisions from that standpoint. In a collision, I'm just using that word as, you know, some kids will crash, they'll be able to be stable. Some kids will crash and walk through. Some kids will crash and then have to jump. Like all these different things happen and occur. And a lot of it is just that strategy and the loading piece. So I just call that landing. And then I'll give you a really quick example. Again, this is just a different type of collision. We all saw the other young lady be stable. She has to hop. She hops to the right. That does give you information. If you watch her from behind, you'll kind of see why that occurs, but we'll get into that a little later. But I mean, it's not complicated in terms of, let me give you a better one. For her, it was just a directional thing. We worked on the shift for her, find out where your energy's going. And I mean, she doesn't hop at all anymore. And I didn't ask her not to hop. There was no, hey, don't do this, don't do that. It's just her value was in the shift. She thought about getting weight into her front foot. She wasn't doing it really well in the first place. So once that happened, that's what changed. And so when we get to that, we talked a lot about the hip archetypes. Those are influences there in that space. But just to finish the summary on this, 5 is just your reacceleration into landing. So what that would be like in a pitch is the reason there's another spike in energy is because you hit, all that energy hopefully gets absorbed into the body, and then the athlete is creating a secondary collision where they're reaccelerating into that foot they landed with. So when that's happening, there's another spike, and then everything is just okay, just my body weight is back on the plate. And so for me, it's the easiest way to kind of look at things. This other piece right here, this is a different tool. That tool measures every time someone runs, that it's an oscillation. So it's a measure, they're applying force. This measures everything strictly horizontally. So this is the back foot pushing, this is the front foot. I use this really just for trends. And if an athlete I know they don't like they're telling me momentum is a big part of what they're trying to do, and I'm just watching them move, and I'm like, all you do is push with your back foot, or all you do is throw yourself off the rubber, I'll just tie them to the machine, and the back foot will always have the biggest acceleration, and then the front foot will drop. And so I'll just tell them you're lying to yourself. Like there's nothing you're doing with your motion or how you're performing your pre-motion that is creating momentum. I just want you to understand that so we can get rid of that piece first. And then whatever that leads from a coaching perspective to next, in terms of anything you'd like to change, again, it's about meeting them where they're at. And that a lot of that turns into discovery. This is what you're actually doing. Are you aware of it? And that's how I use kind of this energy flow model. It is, I don't need them to do all of these things or be cognizant of all of them right away. What things are important to you? Last 2 kids, number 2 was important to them. They weren't doing it. So you know what? Let's work on what's important to you because it's pretty poor. And then when we get into the hip archetypes are an easy way for me to understand which muscles are likely active the most or contracting when that load moment happens, because that's going to dictate how motion flows afterwards. And a very easy way to kind of understand this. And when I say that, I do say easy for me, but there is an expectation on my side that there's a level of basic anatomy, if you don't know right now, that you go ahead and start to learn, because you cannot compete with the skeleton of the body. There is no idea of, I want this kid to do this, but if their skeleton is in a position where only certain muscles contract, and when those muscles contract, the only action of the joint is such and such, then it becomes a reality that I'm missing. They are never, and I will repeat this, never going to do what you ask if the skeleton cannot perform the joint action. You can think all you want, it's not going to happen. So we want to understand that piece. So from the hip archetypes, the definitive thing here is just when they create that load moment. So now this young lady, a little different archetype. Right there, we see the knee going backwards. So that's going to be a little bit, that's going to be a 2. Okay. The heel is slightly up. So when I'm looking at that, I'm saying, okay, so we're going to get some stretch shortening cycle from the Achilles tendon. That's the blue thing there. The calf and the quad are still mostly the dominant co-contractors, which are creating knee extension. When the calf and quad contract together, or the body is in a position, the skeleton is in a position where that's the quickest, most available movement solution, contraction available, then I know that that creates knee flexion. So then if I know that's happening, I'm looking at where is everything upstream above the knee that is going to get influenced by this knee extension. That's simply how I would look at it from that point. And I don't judge anything. I just know this narrows down some certain solutions that a kid is going to likely have from that moment. If we look at a comparison between these two, we'll get the initial. That's going to be a hip archetype 1. And so again, the difference here is just that little heel raise gives us a little more access to motion forward. When the heel flattens, primarily at that load moment, again, if I go back to the hip archetypes, then I know I'm really getting a quad, a really hard quad contraction. And then the dorsiflexors of the foot are most active. Those don't create joint actions. Those don't create joint actions at the knee that would create forward motion. They are more creating stability at that point. So it's an easy now understanding for me. Well, why don't I see her get into her front foot more? Why don't I see her drive better? And for a lot of us, that heel turns in, and the majority of people in this presentation aren't in the university, so haven't heard this, but understand that your heel is always looking for your center of mass. If your center of mass isn't shifting and moving towards your next step, your heel is going to rotate because it wants to be able to stabilize and find that center of mass. She can think all she wants that she's trying to get over this foot, but her body isn't in a position to move forward yet. So she's going to have to find a separate solution. And a lot of times that separate solution, again, is going to be trying to swing or throw limbs or accelerate the upper body. And that's why that foot turns so much. And then we just move on. Okay, if that hip is an external rotation as I'm on top of it, then I know I'm probably not going to get a lot of linear propulsion from the athlete. And if I do, there's going to be a different strategy that's used. And so, again, this is just information to understand how they interact. And so I look at, what did this young lady tell me that was the most important thing for her? And it makes perfect sense when we watch it. She is ultimately very concerned about when she releases the ball. That is all she talked about. And then I watch her pitch, and we notice her collision. And when she delivers the ball, happens at about the same time. So it makes perfect sense to me that a high priority for you is when you release the ball, because you've got to be very, if you want to be effective or locate the ball, you've got to constantly be on top of knowing when is this thing going to land, and I can tie my collision because I'm only going to be stable for 2/10 of a second, 2/100ths of a second. I got to throw the ball at that moment. And that's why the release becomes something that's so important for that kid. And it happened because she's in a space where the solution to throw the ball, how they're moving, supersedes what we want mechanically. The body is going to figure out some way, and we've got to get off this point of having, ideal mechanics, like in that space. Like, there are no KPIs really in pitching outside of muscle and propulsive strength. They're not. Because in order to have a constant KPI, key performance indicator, because I see lots of people trying to do that now, it means there has to be a negative and a positive when it's not achieved for 95% of those people. You could find 5 kids, and I mean, this kid, from everything she says, like, pretty successful kid. You could find others that perform and deliver the ball that same way at that same age group and may throw it 10 miles per hour less and have no command. So that landing, those things wouldn't be a KPI. Reach wouldn't be a KPI. Any of these things. We don't have KPIs, and you don't have to feel the need that because you see other people saying we should, you don't have to. We're not good enough yet in this space where we've found things that are that relevant and relate too much. There's too much variability at that moment in time for that space. But again, that's why I just want these 3 things as a general framework. So I understand, like, she's not going to get relative forward motion when that heel is flat. So something else has to create that motion for her. She doesn't shift her weight well. That's why she's already trying to push with her front leg at this moment in time. That's why the heel is turning. So she has to pull herself and then swing. And again, this is why it's different for a lot of people, is because we can go to someone who has the same hip archetype, which, you know what? Her front foot never looks for her body. The reason for that, she's not trying in the same moment, for some reason, this young lady, she's trying to get off the rubber as quickly as possible. So is she, if you ask her. But there's some genetic gifts there, some general athletic awareness that allows her to have a high priority of actually loading this foot before she tries to move. That's not a priority here. Even though they're both looking up, even though whatever, this is the importance of understanding what our hip archetypes do, and then the solutions that someone would have to create later on downstream to still be able to load that space. Because I'll tell you right now, I work the shift with both of them. One of them is aware right away, oh, that's what a shift feels like. The other one is not. And there's reasons for that. And I would think most of you would guess, well, oh, she's aware of it. Camry don't know a lot of what she does, but she's a P who's probably 95, not the 95th percentile of athleticism of any pitcher. She can run 19 miles an hour. She jumps 22 inches. She is an uber athlete in that space. That means there's going to be a lot that okay, she doesn't really have to focus on or care about because her body's going to take care of that piece. That can lead towards problems later on, and it has in some instances, but it's up to me to be aware of that as the coach for her so that I'm able to bring her back to that homeostasis where she can be effective again. But that's why the hip archetypes for me were created, to give you an understanding of just, you're not using it to necessarily change people from archetype to archetype. You're looking at how they move through things, what their thoughts are in terms of what they're doing, and then, okay, what does real science say about what's possible or what they're capable of from when load is placed in those tissues, meaning that, their muscles. And then the ultimate thing there is just Newton's laws are applied to everything I do. I'm thinking about the entire time what the kid says, what their signature is like, what their hip archetype is like, what do these laws say about those things? And that's where, especially in this place right here, I'm going to jump to this one right here, Newton's second law. This is where, if you've gotten the slides, these are going to be the most skill specific laws, and they create skill and technical skill because as athletes get older, every piece of research has shown that they slow down in terms of, if you just measure them and how fast they're moving across the circle, younger athletes will always lean towards acceleration and speed because they lack strength. Their brain knows this, their body knows this. Athletes who start to get in the weight room, start to build strength, are going to move slower, but they are going to have greater ground reaction forces because of their mass, and they're not moving entirely slower. And then there's the coordination piece of it. So we have to understand that aspect when you're dealing with, especially, I mean, it's not going to be as big an issue anymore. We're not recruiting young kids, thankfully, at 11 and 12 years old anymore. But when you get kids that don't have a high level of training experience, they haven't been in the weight room a lot, they lack strength, period, you are going to see a very, 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 very common solution of them swinging limbs and them using their upper body to try to be fast and as quick off the rubber as possible instead of relying on strength and stability. So we want to understand that piece there because it's an easy explanation of why these two are different. When I look at Newton's second law, those two variables, I wrote it as a technical skill. Mass becomes and acceleration becomes technical skills because the position of the anatomy of the skeleton dictates how well we're going to accelerate. You can easily see right here, right now, if I'm in external rotation of the hip and the foot is out, I'm not going to be able to be in a position to create torque at the hip. So I'm not going to get as much glute excitation or contraction as I want in the pitch. One of the positive correlations to velocity and command is greater glute max voluntary contraction strength during the pitch. The higher they measured how that glute contracted, it positively correlated with how hard they were throwing the ball. So, am I in a position, or am I helping the athlete get to a position where that glute can contract the most? And so, from a coaching standpoint, I'll tell you how that made me coach this kid in particular. Okay. I know that the release is important to them. For me, that's like, it also helped me because you already crash and like rely a lot on timing to be able to throw the ball. So I know some things are going to be off. It also tells me from a relevancy standpoint, I can help you more in your drive right away because you're a little more attuned to, you're going to try to release the ball at the right time anyways. And It's not good at this moment in time yet. So I'm not really worried about messing it up, anything like that. But I know from what you told me, you don't care about your drive as much. So that gives me an understanding that I can introduce a lot more newer information to you because there's not a lot of stored information that you're really having to deal with that either opposes my idea or agrees with my idea. So I know that she gets into hip external rotation, right? So I know she's not accessing the glute as well as she should. So I know from that standpoint that if I look at her from behind, there's likely going to be some drift. I mean, even from the side, you can see that, she hops directionally. So here we go. Here's that same moment. I have external rotation of the hip. So that means just from that moment, I know from a structural standpoint, I'm not going to get a lot of glute contraction, meaning the glute and hip extension is what's going to take me to this position. I need to know that before I'm thinking about what does this look like? Because some people, if the foot was straight, would tell you, oh my gosh, that's hip extension. It's a great reach, blah, 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 this and that. Again, you don't know anything about anatomy if you're saying that. Like, that's not how it works. And that's why physics is so important. How you move in, and I made that point during the summary, how you move in and out of positions, not seeing a position, is the important concept because of Newton's first law. An object in motion stays in motion until acted upon by an external force. The glutes are the thing that's going to drive you straight. If they can't get active, I'm going to have a lot of excess energy. And then I'm going to have some pitches where I really didn't get on top of it. And I'm all the way over there to the left. And so those are just things. Okay, what's the low-hanging fruit? Introduce it. Hey, let's see what your pitch looks like when we have a more recognized motion. And all I told her is like, I want you to use your back leg as a steering wheel to make sure your weight gets on top of this foot a little more. And then let's just see and play around with, what that kind of looks like for you. And so kids are going to do it in different ways. This kid's CrossFitter, does a lot of CrossFit stuff. So she's been in CrossFit for like 2-3 years. All right. So for her, she was like, okay, yes, we did a couple exercises here. All we did was a shift exercise. And I'll show you what that is in a second. But she would do this before her pitch day. She'd be like, okay, I want my thigh to feel that way. Still very similar. She's still in hip archetype 1. But the intent changes everything. Understanding that there's a place that I need to go after that happens creates significant change for her. One, and this is just the first lesson. And especially for those that get kids that are much older and have more information or at the college level, like we need to find these points because we don't have a lot of time. And if I can get a little buy-in somewhere, then I can ask more or I can require more also that they're going to buy into. Again, do I necessarily believe that at this, I'm 37 years old, so I am very much of the mindset of there's a lot of things you shouldn't have to tell these kids. There's a lot of things that, so what? So what? We get paid to adapt to the kid we're in front of now. So you're either going to or, recruit exactly what you want. Create a template and a sheet that everyone and anyone could look at so that you only get the type you like at your camps because you're going to develop them well and you've shown you can develop them well at a high level. That's something that's important. In any event, we're going to have to do a lot more to ease and appease the minds of these young kids because that's where we're at in terms of how they train, how they adopt things. Yeah, you'll get that once in a while, and You want the same thing. You want to ride that stallion as long as you can, but it's not always going to be that way. And again, so like just from there, at the moment she loads, you can see there's so much more intent and focus. The hip is so much closer to the foot. There was no relative motion. Like, look how far her hip is from her foot. That's why it's searching for it. Now it's not searching for it anymore. And then again, like, we didn't do much. All we did, all we did was a shift drill. And the shift drill is very simple. And I'll show you what that is here in a second. But I mean, those are entirely different changes for an athlete. And again, it's just how do I get them to understand themselves better? And that's what the energy flow model is about. When I get to understand them, then I get to kind of tie all these things together and really make it so that it's easy to see change or influence. Because again, as a coach, like those are two entirely different kids you're coaching if you're trying to find out things to help their posture, help their command. Hey, why is my ball doing this? Why is my ball doing that? Well, do you know where your body is in space all the time? And if you were at the presentation, when we got asked, what is the biggest thing that creates or increases performance, velocity, whatever, I just said repeatable actions, because repeatable actions change everything about how things can happen for you. And if I were to say, particularly the biggest things about these laws here and how you would use them in your lessons, again, is think about the positions they're in and how these laws relate to those positions. And I'm going to say that, again, this force equals mass times acceleration piece is going to be very important, because mass and the way that we call it weight transfer, where their mass is only important at the moment they apply force. And that was one of the biggest things that I didn't get to say there at the presentation. And I think of all of Newton's 3 laws, that's probably the most, if you can get the most bang from your buck, just understanding that important piece. It is not just move in a certain direction. It is apply force. So if the majority of their weight isn't in that foot, when they're applying or thinking they're applying force into the rubber, you are not maximizing their ability to create direction. So all research has shown us is that the higher that fourth peak is, the higher this is, the higher throwing velocity, period. There's been like 8 papers that have correlated that, and they all come to the same conclusion. So everything in 1 through 3 isn't necessarily about how powerful their drive can be. And I've told kids this all the time. I've told some coaches, improving your drive visually or whatever does not mean you're going to throw harder. There is no positive correlation to accelerating faster or being the person that accelerates the most or has the most momentum. Momentum is a vector quantity. So if I'm moving across the circle at 10 miles per hour, that is effectively the momentum I have. There are no positive solutions that increases how hard you're going to throw. The only thing is this, and it makes super easy sense. If I have a larger number of energy to pull from, the likelihood that I'm going to throw harder potentially is always higher from me. So everything about this piece is about making this number higher. And that can take you to the performance side with your strength coaches or with your understanding as a person. Because one thing we want to understand about that piece is that you can make that number higher or lower by how you land and the trajectory. And so there's 2 pieces. If this is the quantity that's important, I'm looking at it in 2 ways. One, how high is the number? And then the submodel of that, the more progressive piece is, what is the efficiency that I get in relationship to how high that number is? And what I mean by that is that you can jump and have a strategy of being stiff, and it will increase higher impulses. But it is a very easy example. That is what she does here. That is what that would look like. I'm trying to be stiff early. You're likely going to get a lot higher ground reaction force. But that also means I have to be very, very good at guessing when to release the ball, because I get the shortest amount of time that I'm stable, as opposed to if this number is maybe 50 pounds lower, which isn't a lot in that case, maybe 75, but I'm able to stabilize it better. I have an opportunity to, instead of I use 50% of this 500 pounds, I use 80% of this 425 pounds. And so those are things to think about in terms of when you're watching someone move, and also the things from a trainable aspect where you want to understand different things can come from, because questions we always have are, again, why does she throw hard and she doesn't? They're same size, same shape, they seem to move similarly. Well, stop looking at kids from the side, look at them from behind and in front. That's going to show you this piece right here. Are they actually having the majority of their body weight on that front leg when they're pushing? If they're not, or their hips are internally rotated, externally rotated, then you know the glutes aren't going to be the biggest propulsive factor in hip extension, which means you're not going to get a linear, a straighter path of energy. And we can all understand that the straighter something is in terms of energy flow, the more energy is going to be let out. That is how everything that you're starting to discover in the throwing motion in terms of laws of a conservation of acceleration, whip, deceleration of the lower forearm, blah, 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 blah. That's what all of those things are about. And we have to understand that piece there. So from a perspective of how this gets done, that's how solutions for me are able to happen, and how I'm able to affect change in that way. And then I know what's likely going to happen. So if I know it's important when she releases the ball, I know she's a strong kid. She drives hard, right? Likely because she does this, there's going to be a lot of balls that when she drives progressively harder, she's got more energy to deal with. Obviously, she deals with it pretty well because she's actually got some strength. Those balls are going to go up a little more. So I want to preemptively say, hey, I'm not worried about where the ball's going right now. It's just like I relate it to what she does. When you have a three rep set, is your form the same as when you have a 12 rep set? Well, no, because the weight's heavier. Exactly. So if you're landing and there's more ground reaction forces that you're having to deal with, you're obviously going to have some time where you have to adjust and challenge that space. Do you take weight off the bar all the time, or do you have to push yourself? No, I push myself. Okay, same thing. I'm just letting you know, in the time that we're trying to get acclimated to higher ground reaction forces, the ball may not necessarily go where you want. And I want to help you understand that, because the adjustment you'll make is you'll go back and try to make landing prettier or release it differently, blah, blah, blah. That's going to take away from progressing to greater areas of command and velo that we'd like to get to in that space. So I try to put everything as much as possible up front to be able to do that. Any questions in particular about this piece? Any questions about the laws? Again, if you have separate, like, you don't want to ask it right now, but you have individual questions on the slides, again, email me, ask me. I'm an open book. I want to be able to answer as much as possible in that space. point. You can also ask like the AI companion and stuff to be able to do stuff there. All right, so the next piece of that presentation, testing and data, that led us to this. And I think one of the biggest things I wanted people to understand here is the ecosystem or the test battery that you use, you don't have to have force plates. You don't have to have something that measures things horizontally. Not everyone's going to have access to those things. But the ultimate thing you're thinking about is what I'm testing, does it actually amplify my coaching skill at that moment in time? And as I'm creating any type of framework in that space, I had a question real quick. You mentioned you did the shift drill with that P, wondering what that was. I'm going to show it. It's going to go part of this testing battery. But just so you have it, it's the running back shift that you can look up in the FD library drill. But when we get back to this piece, this test battery, again, the emphasis is, hey, how can I create something that allows me to amplify my coaching piece? Okay. One of the things that needs to be important is height and weight. I know at some schools you can't necessarily be able to take weight or do body composition, stuff like that. But you can also educate your athletes on things that are important about being an athlete. If you're an athlete, you are concerned about the shape you're in because it likely leads to performance. If you just go to regular research on lean fat versus fat mass versus fat-free mass, all those things, you're going to find all kinds of information that says it changes how the body moves. There are two particular studies in 21 and 22 by Friesen et al. That looked at body composition. While body composition did not affect velocity significantly, it did alter joint angular velocities at specific joints. What that means very easily is that we're only performing this study in a window of time. If as an athlete has more fat mass and it continues to alter how their joints accelerate and the direction they accelerate, that puts us in a space where those are precursors to injury. That's why that's important. The other study in 22 looked at propulsion, meaning how they're driving off the rubber. Obviously, body fat percentage in that space, there's going to be differences in how they drive off the rubber based off their fat percentages or fat-free versus or fat mass versus fat-free lean mass. And when we look at that, it goes right back to Newton's laws of physics, and we talked about that second law. As a skill, it is much easier for me to accelerate or to transfer my weight when I don't have excessive or change in how my joints have to operate because of more fat mass in certain areas. Because again, nobody's body necessarily deposits fat in the same areas. We have different body types, endomorphic, or you've seen it, may have, read a magazine, they talk about pear shape, triangle shape, where you store fat is different. Okay. So sometimes that is actually beneficial for some athletes because the storage of fat is more where their center of mass is. So you could actually see the opposite happen technically, where if they're leaner, it takes them a while to adjust because they don't have as good of a center that they used to have that they were aware of. But it is important if you're training other athletes, younger athletes, because you need to know when they go through height changes, if they're still growing, if those types of things. Growth spurts change everything about how an athlete operates. And that's why it's so important for me in particular that I'm always just making athletes aware of these 5 moments. because the easiest transition is going to be, you didn't look like the six mechanics that I said are absolutes. No, you just know where your weight is at all points in time and in space. And because you know where your weight is, it's an easier adjustment when you grow to be like, oh, usually when I used to do this, I would feel this. I don't feel that anymore. Let me play with that and figure out how to feel it again. And that's a much easier time than, okay, I just grew 6 inches. I used to have a torso and lower body that were more even. Now I just grew really from my thigh, my femur. And so now I have longer legs and a short torso, and that completely changes how I'm going to move through space. But if I'd learned where weight is, then I can easily start to make that reconciliation and restoration about, okay, nothing changes. I've just got to go back to understanding the simple drills that help me. Where's my weight moving in this space? So those are reasons height and weight is important. When we got to the jump testing, there was some good things here that we talked about, but I wanted to expand a lot about especially this time frame right here. If you're at a school that can do jump testing and that can pass force plates, or even if it just becomes where you use a lower model where you're just doing like a jump mat where they're testing vertical, tracking those trends is important because it gives you an understanding, especially in a seasonal setting, of what does the season's toll take on my athlete. And then you can use different calculations to, there's different formulas that you can research and are online about. Instead of, for me, I use vertical jump to body weight to look at relative power. You can do that from a broad jump. You can do that from different things. But the jump testing gives me an easy indicator if we're tracking it and we're looking at trends. Like, it was real easy for me to understand and explain to this young lady why she wasn't throwing as hard right after her high school season. Towards the end of her high school season, she had lost 5 pounds. Not only had she lost 5 pounds, this is relative to body weight. So just because it's just 2%, that's relative to also not having the same mass to create the same force. And so if you're not able to do that, then it gives me an indicator and an idea by using that jump testing to be able to kind of meet the athlete where they're at. But this was a strong piece for me that now we're getting into her second high school season where we've been talking about it, very honest, to hold her to a standard. I was like, look, you're going to all these camps and all these schools. You can't even do the stuff you're supposed to post game to stay healthy. Why would I, as a college coach, want you to pitch in a World Series if I know once we get to the World Series or the conference tournament, you're going to be throwing slower because you don't do the things you need to take care of your body? Like, that's a conversation, and it's a conversation that's related to information we're taking. And I'm having this at ages with these kids because I understand those are things that are going to happen and be important. And especially now, in an era where there's real money involved, you're spending a piece of the pie towards one girl over the other, or one person more so than the other, and you're trying to distribute and decide, like, okay, with how we want to do things, how far is a pitcher taking us, and how much are we willing to spend on our ace versus this other group, or do we really want to ace? Do we really, like, those things are important on that space. And then also on the time frame of with our pitchers, say in any event we're looking at these things, it's an easy conversation if there's still parents involved. Hey, well, look at what just happened. You tell me, like, you're spending money to see me. I can only do so much in once a week. I can only do so much for you when we've got to throw during the hours that you're with me. Why aren't you attacking the weight room? I don't want to go to the weight room and be like, well, she's been complaining of some leg pain, and so she hasn't lifted, but she can still pitch. When we just saw you're going to hit the ground 300 to 400 times harder than any weight you're going to lift. Three to four times harder, excuse me, than any weight you're going to lift. And we've stopped preparing for that. And then we're surprised why things tail off as we get deeper into the season. But if you track these trends over time, where you start doing them, and you can do it with broad jump, track their trends on a broad jump. You can do it with vertical jump. Vertical jump, there's a lot of good research on just tracking the vertical jump over time and what that tells you about the athlete. You can do the same things. We'll talk about grip strength here in a second. But what I wanted to get to is these important pieces is that the jump testing can be powerful in what is responsible during their off season in summer. When you have, again, an ecosystem of things that help the athlete. Because when we talk about like that ecosystem, we talked about these 4 signatures. This is just a drive signature. So for me, I'll explain that to you a little more. There's the drop. Most of the weight is in the back leg. There's her shift. We see this little bump at the shift as opposed to what I showed you in the initial. This young lady didn't shift very well. That's why she didn't throw very hard. She didn't move weight anywhere but to the left. This, when you see a shift and it has another pump, another hump right there, it is because the athlete, and this is where, if you followed me for a long time, where I used to talk about the hamstrings a little more in that front leg. The hamstring helps stabilize your front knee so that your weight can move on top of it. And so when I'm talking about that piece, is when she shifts, there's your hamstring. It engages so that the knee doesn't shift side to side. That's what it does eccentrically. It's in a lengthened position, meaning the hamstring isn't shortening. It's just kind of contracting in a lengthened state. So there is no space where we technically have to activate the hamstrings, so to say. It is still just a load piece. We'd activate the hamstrings in our prep work. Or if we know an athlete is the bang for your buck is the shift and they're not doing it, say if you go to these whatever assessments that tell you she's dominant anteriorly or dominant posteriorly, you just may change the cue. You may say, I want you to pull if they're supposedly posterior chain dominant. I want you to pull yourself into your front foot as opposed to whatever else you may say. That may give them some better resolution there in terms of how they do it. But when weight is on top of that, because they accelerated into that position, you're going to see a little bump right there. And then you'll see the eccentric, meaning the foot flattens. And then I don't push till here. And that's where that push comes from. So we're just looking at spaces like that in that pitch signature in that moment. Obviously, metrics and pitch logic. One of the big things I wanted to use the visuals here for was like, that's all over the place. This is more consistent. It's the same kid. Lo and behold, you know, this and this are a lot different speeds. The video piece, especially when we talked about the Newton's laws and those pieces, when you're looking at video, do not sleep. On Form has where you can have 2 cameras going at the same time. You need to be looking at side and rear view for kids that you think, especially, do not move their weight onto their front foot very well. Because side view is going to hide so much of what they're doing in that space. And so that's just a tidbit from there that's going to be valuable for us. If I'm not looking at the rear view, that's the same kid. Like, she can't handle anything about that landing. It's no wonder she's off to the left, and then she also hops. You hop because you can't handle that piece of energy. And if you notice, well, you don't notice. This kid, no training experience. This one, tons of training experience. So even though they have similar looking hops and the hop happens to both. That is different from that young lady right there. Why? Because there's other things going on too. Again, there is no magic marker there. It's creating a system for yourself to be able to see what you can coach well, or where you know your blind spots are. Those things are important. And again, for me, no matter what I do or how I grow and learn, what other assessments I have, it helps me just to create, how do we get to the best performing athlete that I have? What things for me am I tracking? What things are important? And for me, I will tell you honestly, I do relate a lot of my stuff to what they're going to or what they should get in the college setting based off of my experience working with world-class athletes, being in organizations that these how these three heads operate. Don't for one second think just because an organization is worth billions of dollars that they do things better than your university. That's not necessarily true. For the most part, we all have the same issues. It's communication between departments, AT, medical, strength staff, skill staff. The only thing I would say is even harder is that pitching itself, the language, there's its own separate language for some coaches in some space that because we already are behind the ball, that we have a strength coach that this is usually just a stepping stone for them. They're not necessarily interested in learning the language, which is why I would say it's so important to do some of the research on your own so that you have a template. And when you go to the hiring process, depending, not all schools have the same say in hiring process, and I understand that. But I would say that would be something you should fight for. Hey, I want to know who you're going to place that's going to be with our girls because I want to know if they're okay with me making, because it is, they're making their job easier. Because if you have a proven thing that you know trends well for you and is getting your girls to perform their best, when it comes time for them to look for another job, that's going to be a great recommendation. Well, oh yeah, he was awesome. Like, couldn't find like one of the best we've ever had there. And and I say this to the strength coaches that I talk to too, because a lot of them don't realize that because they want to go and be in pro sports, blah blah blah. I was like, you realize, like, if you, part of it is adaptability, and if you do a really good job here, chances are you're going to be able to move up the way you want. But hopefully, as more money gets poured in, you know, they'll be able to to be a living space for people that want to be softball lifers in this space. Or maybe it just becomes where it's just outsourced and there's a communication and template piece that you're like, hey, we're gonna hire you, but we want you to understand, you know, we work with this person and he's gonna help you educate and be able to be a star in your system without making you be less of who yourself or whatever that case is. But those things are important in that space. And I would say of all three things that are important that are the lowest, excuse me, of all these things, the three things that I would say are the most important are number one, tracking trends in whatever space it is you use. If you're only able to do the broad jumps or this and that or the vertical jumps, if you do have force plates and you're able to do the jump testing, this piece right here, tracking trends, is over time, because whether you move schools, you don't, you're going to have that information, or depending on your contract, if you, whatever information you can take, you'll also have that stored memory of, hey, these are things I usually see throughout a season. And then you start to narrow down about these are the types of kids that are seeing these things. And again, it becomes easier for you to understand what you want and start to know more about yourself in terms of what you really coach well and what you want to coach. Because I will personally tell you, I don't see, and I wish more people would feel like this there, because we're doing it already, but there is nothing wrong with having a particular space that you know you excel in and targeting that space. And I don't think we do it enough. And I don't think we think that's acceptable in a lot of spaces. Well, no, I want to be a master of all things. Nobody's a master of all things. And you don't have to be. You have to have resources and you have to have things that amplify your coaching at all times. And so for me, like I bought force plates because I read those studies and I've been in performance training. And so I found a place that had cheap force plates, vernier. I told them I was a school and I bought force plates for less than $400. And these are the same ones I used because they're still accurate. You're going to get 98% of the same thing you get in a Hawkins. The only thing I run into is they're smaller. So when I get kids with big feet, that's about it. But I did that because I read the research and I had experience and I said, hey, this can be valuable for me. There's no point in doing jump testing and then you've got all this great information. You don't know what asymmetry means. You don't know what, well, they're more of an eccentric developer of propulsion. Like this is where like the strength coach could tell you that, but you still got to learn how that's applicable to what you're seeing and the things you see within that space as well. The hip archetypes, it's just easy category. I know that you can't move or do things that your skeleton is not in a position to do so because muscles only contract and create certain action. So that helps me. It less helps me, it more helps me create a visual for the athlete in terms of why are you asking yourself to do something you're never going to be able to do? Doesn't make any sense at all to me. I like the pitch logic because it has an IMU. It's something they use in all indoor sports because it tracks, again, anytime you accelerate whatever the threshold is for the algorithm, then it gives you the picture of these balls. So for me, it's an easy way to help, especially my younger kids, see that you're all over the place. Stop doing that. You tell me where in life where you can perform the same task 5 ways and all 5 ways differently, and you're going to be successful. Someone's going to want that. Someone's going to choose you. You're right. You can't. If I ask you to go squat the bar right now, you're not going to show me 5 different squats. You're going to do the same squat, and progressively over time, you're going to get stronger. If it does not exist outside the circle, it doesn't exist in the circle, simply. And so for me, it's an easy way to validate that to them, to show them, hey, well, because I don't have the expectation you're going to throw harder. I don't have the expectation you're going to spin it better. I don't think any of these things are going to happen for you in that space. So those things are important. The video, I would say, especially understanding it this way, the energy flow model and just working through drop, shift, drive, and those pieces. One of the biggest things you're going to get to see and understand is why arms are in the position that they're in. And that's a topic I'm not going to talk a lot about, but I'm pretty positive there's going to be a lot of interest in that space because very simply, again, you cannot compete with your skeleton. And oh, that wasn't a good video, Dad. Variability that we have. So you can see that she's behind the ball a little more. And then if we go to the other young lady that hopped, but didn't have strength training in the same manner. At the same moment, she's in a different position with her hand on the ball. And so a lot of times when like right now we're hearing a lot about arm variability and blah blah blah. Like her hand is never in that position when she lands in a good spot. One of the reasons, like it's just very, very simple. If I'm veering to the left, my chest is going to continue moving in that direction. So as my chest is moving towards that left and towards the catcher, my hand and arm are behind me. So my shoulder has to open up, my chest has to open up, which limits my ability to have soft elbow flexion at all. It limits my ability for torque not, it limits my ability for torque not to be placed at the shoulder and have high shoulder distraction forces. But ultimately, it limits the range of motion I get at my wrist and hand. And that is something you can easily kind of stand up and do right now. If you stand up and you separate your feet and you just put yourself off balance, again, there's a reason why most of everything we talked about posture and stability for so many years, because we saw things from athletes who looked successful or looked like they could spin the ball well, and we recognized that that was important. When we understand anatomy more, then we start to see why certain hand positions do happen. And it's not a, hey, well, they only have access or this is their range of motion. So we see this, like, yeah, carrying angles are important, but you can also understand that a carrying angle changes the more volume of pitches they have, it increases because they get tight in their forearm and their shoulder, and they do nothing to release it or return to baseline. So it gets excessive. But we can get to a space very easily when, if I have more linear direction and I'm more stable, she's going to be able to get behind the ball more, which gives her access to different pitch types. On the other hand, when we're within a collegiate setting, there's understanding the ROI on what we can actually change for an athlete in how they're going to land, and just knowing that, hey, because because of this posture and position right here, and you can see the difference here, her chest isn't completely open. I'm only going to get so much flexion ability at the elbow, which means in terms of what I'm throwing, however I'm teaching it, like I'm looking at things like, okay, maybe that's why she feels she throws a screwball really well. I mean, there were some things with Carlin that, well, Carlin, like, do we necessarily want to change things so this can get better? It's just going to, let's forget the name. It's going to be called something different. But it's the same aspect. If this is all I have access to, and I'm in a space where I can't change the athlete much to be able to get a different position, then I'm understanding by what I'm seeing on rap, why it says certain things, and I'm getting to relate that to the athlete a little more. And there's a discussion there to be had in that space. I think from a college setting, that's probably, a discussion you'd all want to have a little more, and we can discuss that individually. You can just email me about that piece. But again, like 100% of the time, when this changes, their access to different arm positions changes. But if I've been pitching for 8 years and this is the only access I've ever had, the ROI is, and the opportunity cost is something we have to think about, because it's going to influence the effectiveness of whatever they have right now as well. And we have to understand both pieces in that case. But overall, like from a general perspective, there's a lot of value in having that ecosystem for yourself and in that place. Um, but it's valuable. And those are the things like I wanted us to understand from that space. And when we looked at like just the example, I kind of already discussed it. That same kid, she's a freshman. It was very easy to know what to work on. Very much like a fall. Like, hey, you've got some responsibilities, kid. Like, She's got hip archetype 3 at different dates, and we're looking at how she moves through those spaces. There's two things, the skill piece and then there's the performance piece. So when we related the two, this was initial right here, these two, there's not really a shift. She's just drops her weight and it goes into both feet, very similar to we saw the young lady that was in the squat rack piece. Even though I only see her once a week, I'm not going to have a lot of effective changes here. I can make her aware of that. Whatever she's doing in high school, she's doing in high school. But the biggest thing I promoted to her was being healthy and being in a better space there. So I worked on the shift piece. And I made those notes in the beginning, like we added the shift in December, didn't have a lot of pop to it. By pop, I just meant there's no power. So we talk about that. Hey, I need you to do these things during the summer. Like you're not very good right now. You're not going to show anybody who you actually are here during the summer. So don't worry about it as much. Let's focus and integrate on these things. And then when we get back to adding that, we see all these things in line. And then from the arm part, like we're just looking at how those things happen in that space. And when I showed the in session thing, like again, the difference between the back and the front, there's a big gap there. We change that gap a little bit and have a better shift. Lo and behold, she threw harder every time there was a shift and it was present. And that's just something very easily that we can kind of look at in those spaces. But overall, from the presentation, those are kind of the biggest moments that I wanted to be able to get into the most. For those of you who wanted more information on the prevention strategies, like I said, just we can dive into this a little deeper, but just email me. We can talk about it a little more in that space. But I think I wanted to get across how all three things came together in terms of the energy flow model, physics, and then the hip archetypes. And then especially like that the ecosystem can be just what you have available. The important piece is it amplifying your coaching? And in that space, are you doing things to narrow down what you feel you're really good at and create that for yourself so that, again, it's just like a marketing funnel. Am I getting the kids that I'd like to have the majority of the time as opposed to, I go out to a tournament and, hopefully something catches my eye. Like it's a tough space to be in. And from everything I've heard, it's likely, especially in mid majors, going to get tougher from that standpoint. But I want to thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it. The one thing, the shift drill that we talked about is very easy. It is super easy. All I do is have kids hold their glove, and I use the words lazy all the time. I want you to be lazy. So if they're right-handed, they'll hold the glove, obviously, in their left hand like a football. And the only variance is if they're a rocker, we'll do more of a step with the shift. If they don't really rock, then we'll just fall into it. Right-handed pitcher, I just want you to be lazy. And then, like me, I fell over a little bit. I don't care. And I tell them, it's an exaggeration of what weight should feel like into that leg. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't do it in your pitch, so it's not going to be perfect either way. And then if they rock more, then they just take a step, left, shift. And everything is just about laziness. I want to see relaxed upper body. I just tell them, I just want you to fall on your leg. And what you'll see is a lot of times those who don't shift well will try to do an RDL or they'll just throw their upper body like that. And those are good. Like it's such an easy coaching space from that point to be like, there's something why you don't trust being in flexion at the knee and the hip at the same time. So let me go talk to the strength coach. Let me go talk to any of these places to be able to get that information. And everything that I've talked about, like I do have all the pieces to it, like how you would progress, drop, shift, drive, all those things, everything on paper and readily available. But yeah, it is in the university side of things. But I'm gonna have another presentation that'll be just for parents mostly and athletes, be slightly different. But from the coaching perspective, like I said, if there's more that you want or more questions, I'm an open book. You can ask any of the questions. We talk about, okay, well, I only have access to these things. What would this look like in our setting? Any of those pieces would be fine for me. Um, I'm not hard to reach. I am busy, yes, but bug me. That's all I would say. But I want to thank you all for your time. I do appreciate it. I know it was lengthy. I probably could have probably gone still another like 2 hours on the other stuff. But if you want that, if you're interested in that, I can do another one of these. It's not a problem to me. It's just finding the time and then having more of a space for coaches to be able to ask questions. You can email me those, anything like that. Um, this recording will go to the emails that you registered with, and then it'll be sent there. And then for those of you from the university, it'll be the usual space, the monthly webinar space. Beth, I will answer your question. I'll send you a message there um, in the app messenger. That's a great question, but I'll answer that there. Um, but yeah, if you guys have any other questions after this, like I said, feel free to email me. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Uh, I know it was long, but I mean, like I said, I feel like I want to talk about this all the time. So, especially like you get into the arm stuff and positions there, like those things are really neat, really valuable. How you can see change and really do it from a space where the athlete is at.
Thank you.
Have a good one, everyone.